that we were able to attend in the last little bit. And I will say that we've been hard at work. Surely we are hard at work to keep everything going here and with our organization. So in our second month of the year, second meeting of the year, I'm glad to see that we've had folks joining us again. I want to give us some time to do any announcements that we may have. If those of you who have announcements, please come on up. I see Viola is going to bring us something real quick, and then I think we'll move to Marilyn after that. But Viola, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Joseph. Viola Baskerville, Richmond, Virginia. I wanted to make our listening audience and our membership aware of two things. If you are, I guess, a member of a family that has land use issues, particularly heirs property issues, the Black Land Trust, in conjunction with the Land Trust Alliance, has a resource toolkit. Now, heirs property is property that's in the family, is shared among family members. It's threatened, particularly with Black land ownership, of being taken away. So landtrustalliance.org, landtrustalliance.org is the website that has the resource toolkit if anyone in the audience needs help with respect to addressing heirs property issues. The second issue I want to make people aware of is the threatened demolition of Richmond Community Hospital here in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond Community Hospital is a 122-year-old institution, started in 1902. But it did not get its building until 1932. This was a group of Black nurses and doctors that came together that wanted an institution for Black patients and Black doctors so that there could be equitable and respectful healthcare services provided. If you want to be more informed about what's going on with that proposed demolition, Virginia Union University and HBCU University owns that property. This is Black History Month. It is abysmal that a Black historical institution would think of destroying another site of historic Black significance. We have a Facebook group. It's called Save Community Hospital Work Group. Save Community Hospital Work Group. I urge you to join us and keep apprised of what's going on with that. The other announcement is with respect to the Lemon Project, William and Mary. It is open for registration. Please go to the William and Mary website and register for that hybrid conference. It's held every year. This is the 14th Lemon Project Symposium. Thanks.
Thank you, Viola. I think that that's an important point to make and to touch back on. All of the points that you made were very good, but to touch back on the community hospital aspect, I just want to drive that point home, that it is an important and historic building. And what we often don't think about is how much struggle people had to go through to get something like that started, and how easy it is to simply tear it down. And so it's important. I can tell you just through my own family history, the Fields house, James Apostle Fields house, my 3 times great-grandfather, that house only survives today because it was a hospital itself. It became a hospital after it left the family's hands, after it was sold by James Fields' son, and it became a space for Black people to receive the kind of care that they would not get unless they were in jail. This kind of medical care was not available to people of color unless they were in jail. And so to think about that hospital in both the Fields family, but especially in the community hospital where Dr. Sarah Garland Jones is able to get people in and to take care of people that are simply looking for the kind of basic care and facilities that other folks got just offhand. They simply received that kind of care, and that people had to put their dollars and their dimes together to make that kind of place happen. It's important that we now put in our efforts to help preserve what they did in the past. There's a great article about it in the Richmond Free Press, and I encourage you all to read that. We have, for those of you in the room, we have copies of the Free Press today here for you to read. But that's to me. I'm going to stand down off the soapbox, as we say in this, because we've got a lot of great stuff for you today as well. Because today we're gathering specifically to watch a film. Current is the name of the film, and I'm excited because it's part of an ongoing series, right? It's not just us going to, oh, we'll see this today and then that's it. I think that it's wonderful that we'll be able to take part in this and this docu-series, the first part of which we will watch today, approximately 97 minutes or so. A little bit different for us to be able to do this as a film screening, and I'm very grateful to everyone who's able to make that happen. I want to see if Pam is online just yet. Might be her coming through now, but we wanted to give her a second to give a brief introduction to the film before we do that. And before we get there, is there anyone else who had other announcements? I thought, Marilyn, you might have had one. Is that correct? No. All right. No worries at all then. Okay. Well, give me 1 second here while I pull up the description here, and that way we might give him a little bit more time for this. The brief description of the film is as follows: the time of significant pushback in the teaching of the whole truth, history of the teaching of the whole truth history in our schools and bookbinding throughout the country. This timely film explores the question, why is it important to tell the truth about history? And I love just that prompt. Why is it important to tell the truth about history? Because I think that people don't realize that is even a question. They think, oh, well, history is history. It just must be. There can't possibly be anything else. There's not another version of history. Everything that we've learned is history. But I think that in the last few decades especially, but not only, in the last few decades especially, we've learned that history is less concrete than people have made it out to be. That versions of history exist, and that people have been able to manipulate and tell lies for generations. We are in a building that thankfully has moved away from that, but which used to be a shrine to the lost cause, a great fabrication of history. And now we get to tell these truths in this same building, in the same institution that has taken that turn. So I think there's something significant about that as well. As we go ahead and get ready, though, I see, Pam, is that you on the line down there at the bottom?
It is.
Fantastic.
How are you?
Doing quite well. I'm going to turn it over to you, Pam, to give your brief remarks about that, about the film as we get started. And I also want to remind folks, especially if you are online, if you could please mute your microphones on your computers. That way, especially during the film, we won't have any crossover happening there. But Pam, I'm going to toss it on over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Joseph. Well, I just want to say that I am delighted and I feel really honored that you guys are interested in taking a look at the film. We're doing 6 screenings, and this is really one that's very special to me because I consider myself one of you. And so many of you have been helpful to me in the past when I was at Richmond Hill, Maryland, and Larry, Viola, Besaida, helping to help people with their family history at Richmond Hill. So I wanted to give you a sense of what you'll be watching. So this is a rough cut. It's a work in progress. We are screening it because it's Black History Month and we're interested in getting feedback, especially yours. So we're still doing some audio mixing. We're still adding more music and doing a bit more editing. Right now, it's 90 minutes before the credits, and I encourage you to go all the way through the credits to the end because there's something about the film that relates to the film that actually comes on after the credits that kind of points to the part two. We'll be shooting in Kentucky in the future, and so the after the credits is kind of points to that. In the end, it's as I said, 90 minutes now. In the end, it'll likely be shorter than that, and we'll be really interested to hear your feedback and what you think. You know, maybe we can keep, you know, maybe not keep, or use it in a different format, like on a digital platform. So with that, Joseph, I'll turn it back to you, and we're delighted to show you Current.
Thank you so much, Pam. Pam Smith will be joining us after the film is over too, so that we can provide that feedback exactly like she said, and so that we can talk with her and her partners in this endeavor to make this film happen. So I'm going to go set the room really quickly. I'm going to lower the shades and turn off the lights before we jump into the film. Give me 1 second as I do that, but then we'll be starting Current, Part 1. Here so I can make sure that everything is being shared before I start pressing buttons. Let's go.
We are at Mount Eagle Farm. It's a historic plantation where my ancestors were enslaved before they moved to Kentucky. It's hard to describe. It's that feeling of wanting to touch where my family members were. It feels like a sacred journey. It's a long drive from the main road out to the house. It's probably about 1.5 miles just to get back here. And so I see it populated. You know, I can imagine in my mind's eye people working the tobacco fields. And so it's very mixed because I'm happy to be here. I want them to know that someone came back looking for them and wanting to honor all of their sacrifices. So I love being here. At the same time, it's hard. So you mentioned down the road, my ancestors were enslaved 5 miles from here at Mount Eagle. Thomas Jefferson was actually an executor of the will of Charles Lewis, who was the enslaver there.
Yes. It's really funny. I was doing my research with the Lewises specifically, and how entangled the Lewis family is with the Jefferson family, with Jefferson's brother, Randolph Jefferson, and marries, I'm pretty sure, into the Lewis family. His sister, Lucy, does also. But it's really interesting, even specifically with Charles Lewis and Lucy Jefferson Lewis, that in a lot of his letters, he actually does not communicate with them extremely. And from books that I've read, the relationship between Lucy Jefferson Lewis and Charles Lewis and Jefferson was really different from his relationship with a lot of his other siblings. And I know there was also some property things that happened with Charles Lewis and arguments about that from what I've seen in letters.
My grandmother was, it wasn't that she herself was really interested, but she wanted to help me, and later learned of Matilda. I knew of this line that was connected to the Lewises, the same Lewis family of the Lewis expedition, that extended family. And again, all of this was through enslavement, so it was very distressing to me. But I didn't know about Matilda until I went on a research trip to Kentucky, and somebody in the library suggested that I talk to Don Hodge. And Don Hodge was like a 90-year-old. He since passed. I miss him dearly. But he helped me, and he told me, I'll never forget, because I left him a message with some information about my family. And then he left me a message, and the message was something like, Pam, listen, this is Don Hodge returning your call. I believe you have Jefferson's blood running through you. And so I thought, okay, but how is this going to help me find my enslaved people? You know, and I knew that there were connections to powerful white people like Jefferson. So I was very interested in learning what he knew. And he said he remembered reading a book called Jefferson's Nephews. And in that book, there was a mention of Matilda. And Matilda had told her story. She lived to be almost 90. And she had been enslaved by the Lewises in Virginia and Charlottesville. And then they had taken her and 23 other enslaved people as they moved west to Kentucky. And let's see. In the name of God, amen. I, Charles Lewis of Goochland County and Parish of St. Northam, being of sound mind and memory, do make and constitute and ordain and write this to be my last will and testament. Naming all the children, Francis, Elizabeth. Everybody gets something. Not only something, everybody gets someone.
When you bequeath someone, you pass that person down into the family. Like you could bequeath a home, a favorite piece of furniture, some material possession.
And then these enslaved children, you know, just grow up with, you know, they're assigned to servitude for the white children and the white young adults. Signed and sealed and published by the said Lewis. And what date? I always am looking for the date. The date is very important. December 20th, 1779. So, there you have it. How our country was built. on the backs of people handed down. Also in these records, they're saying, I give my horses to so-and-so. I give my cattle to so-and-so. And then, oh, by the way, my son John gets the youngest Negro. It's very disorienting. It's very, I've been doing this work for a long time, and you can see that you never get used to it.
Of course, as African Americans, when we do this research, a lot of times we're able to find our ancestors only because some sort of property change has occurred.
Well, as with the institution of slavery itself, it's hard to really wrap your arms around people being moved around so casually, so inhumanely.
For someone like myself who has the privilege of knowing their family history, I think that it kind of puts it into perspective. Like, those who aren't able to kind of discover that about themselves, like, it is a really kind of like life-enhancing experience, like learn about your own culture. And if you're unable to do that because your history was obscured, that says a lot about the power dynamic that you've experienced.
When your family has had things for a long time, you get in the habit of having things, and I think that people might be threatened by the idea that maybe what they have didn't come to them through, the fairest or the most, the fairest means. I think this idea of being self-made in this country is really powerful, the idea of the American dream and being able to craft a life for yourself and for your family. And I think when we look at the U.S. from a distance, you realize some people have greater opportunity to pursue that American dream. And if you disrupt that narrative, it can be, it can make you wonder about yourself. Question whether you and your family are as deserving or capable, or how powerful are you?
Being privileged means that you don't have to ask questions.
You don't have to ask questions.
You don't have to ask questions. When you're not privileged, sometimes you have to ask questions. Can I? When we've had a history of having to ask questions and being told what to do, that's not privilege. But when you don't have to consider where you're going and how you're going to be treated, when you don't have to worry about your very existence, when you wake up in the morning, will I be shot down in the streets, or will my life be taken for some reason? When you don't have to worry about those things, then you're privileged. Mm-hmm. But as a people now, even now, we have to sometimes ask that existential question when we get up in the morning: will I make it through the day? Mm-hmm. Will I exist today? Will anybody see me today? We ask ourselves that question. Some people can't relate to that.
I feel like there's this sentiment that I see in a lot of white people that's, oh, I'm just kind of a mix of European whatever, like, I don't really know, I don't really care, I'm white, like, I'm cultureless. And there's like this apathy towards the past, and I wonder if that's in response to what we know about historically white people being the oppressor in so many different scenarios. I wonder if that's led us to kind of be afraid to dig in to the past. Like, oh, I don't want to know if my ancestors owned slaves. Like, that's so uncomfortable. I don't want to know if my ancestors murdered Native American peoples. Like, I'd rather just be kind of vague about it, and I don't know. And this is the first time I'm making that connection, but I've always kind of grown up like, oh, I'm just like white and it's just I'm sure I'm part this and part that. I don't really know or care, and I just have this like bland like American culture. But through your project, I have become a lot more interested in my ancestry and have started to do research and plan to do a lot more because I want to know, like, I want to know who made me up. Like, that's so interesting, and how I fit into this, the history of our country and the history of the world.
I was looking at Lucy Jefferson, and I was looking at John Wales, who was Thomas Jefferson's wife's father. All of these, the Lewis family, the Jefferson family, all of these families intermarried. And so to research one line really means looking at the other lines and looking at origin stories. Where did people come from? And I found that John Wales was an enslaver who commissioned ships to come into a place called Bermuda Hundred.
The scene was so moving to me that I just felt that this was a place that my ancestors came. Having traced my ancestry to Amelia County and trying to find out how they got from here to Amelia County, from anywhere, how they got to Amelia County, period. And then the more research I did and found out that many of the enslaved Africans who disembarked here populated the Piedmont area of Virginia.
Of an ad. Reverend was referring earlier to ships having as many as 400 people. So this ad says, just arrived from Africa. The ship Prince of Wales, Captain James Bivens, with about 400 fine, healthy slaves. The slave sale will begin in Bermuda Hundred on Thursday, the 8th of October, and will continue until all are sold.
The actual site where the slave market was. So I imagine that, you know, if they got off the ship on the wharf down here, that they, you know, they took this route some kind of way to get to this, to where they actually blocks or the slave market was.
This might have been the very historic road.
Probably. Very good chance that it was. Very good chance, because the account that I recently pulled up again about the slave owner who purchased 50 slaves here to take to Roanoke, Virginia. One of the things that interests me is that history. How did enslaved people, my ancestors, get to Amelia, which was started all of this, and the others, their accounts of how our ancestors got to Piedmont, the foot of the mountain, Virginia, Charlottesville.
Where my people were.
Yes. How did they get there? Where were they traded?
You, as an enslaver, clinging to control the lives of another human being, there has to be some story that justifies that, right? They have to deserve it in some way, whether it's the story that nowhere in the Bible is slavery attacked, except for the Golden Rule, to the Constitution permits it, to new ideas of science, that somehow there are such things as races. You know, one of my other favorite quotes in this book is, and it's important to remember, people talk as if in the past people didn't know better. They did, because this congressman from Illinois or somebody in the 1840s says all this stuff about race, this claptrap, you know, the Celtic race, the Anglo race, all of this, says, we know it's not true. And so even as it was being constructed, even as scientists were using photography or cranial drawings or whatever to make up this nonsense, people could see, yeah, that's not really the case. So it's a useful lie that people sustained for very practical purposes. The tragedy is that the lie became its own fact, and that people came to accept that there was such a thing as differences that go all the way through us determined by the color of our skin, and spun entire worlds from all of that. So the short answer to your question is racism, and the idea of race is a rationalization for inequality and injustice.
There's so much lying going on. You have to defy the lie and embrace your truth. You have to, because the truth will set you free. It will help you to understand and put things in perspective that are misconstrued and are buried or distorted. And once you can unpack that, then you're free.
Thomas Jefferson is a very complex man because of the words that he writes in the Declaration of Independence, being all men are created equal and they have unalienable rights, and among those rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, yet still enslaving, like I said, over 600 individuals, and not freeing many at all. By the end of his life, he frees about 9 individuals. In 1827, there was an estate sale. The main headline of that newspaper article and that sale is 130 valuable Negroes. Jefferson was in a lot of debt, which is why this sale was going on. To pay that debt, those individuals were given to family members or kept by family members. But yeah, the enslaved community was fully dispersed all over the United States. And some people were bought by UVA professors. Some folks were given to family members.
We had a professor earlier in the semester, but she was telling us how up until maybe 10 years ago, they didn't really talk about the fact that enslaved laborers built UVA and lived here at all. So that is a big chunk of the university's history that they just left out. And maybe they didn't lie and say there were no enslaved laborers, but it wasn't common knowledge that there were either, which changes a lot about the place.
Why would people leave it out?
What happened at UVA, the president at the time created a commission on slavery. And these two folks headed up this whole thing. And but it was the whole thing was student led, because in 2007 the state apologizes for slavery. The Board of Visitors did. There's a little memorial, a little panel on the ground acknowledging the enslaved labor. But they said that wasn't enough. And so that's when Teresa Sullivan, who was the president at the time, established the Commission on Slavery. They went right to the community. And they needed to have the community buy-in and support. Because you know what? Generations of people are still here from those descendants, where you got Monticello, right? Down on one side of the road in Albemarle, you got James Monroe around the corner from Monticello at Highlands. And then down the road, you got James Madison at Montpelier. my highlights is, you know, when I walk in the memorial and I'm walking it, and there's a whole strategy of it being how it got built in these rings, and it's like an open shackle, and there's levels of the shackles. And but I'm walking in there, Pam, having conversation with the people's names on the wall because I know them.
You know, yeah.
So Warner Hall is a well-known historic house in Gloucester. I don't know specifically numbers for the 18th century, but given the size of Warner Hall, I think close to about 2,000 acres, they probably had somewhere between 75 and 100 slaves at any given time. Yeah.
So Matilda's ancestors would have been among 100 other people who were
most likely somewhere in that vicinity. Yeah.
But how would their housing differ from this?
Differ from this house? I mean, in general, you know, size is one of the biggest, most obvious differences. 2 stories, large rooms. Most slave quarters, by contrast, would have been much smaller frame structures. Occasionally, you do see brick buildings. They're not necessarily built to increase the slaves' comfort. It's more they may have been built to match the style of the larger house. But then you have the people that are here, largely enslaved, who are the ones that are actually building the structures and living in most of the other buildings and using those buildings on a daily basis. So it's this interesting mix of, you know, an idealized vision and then the reality of who's actually building and working in them. And, you know, often today we're mostly left with these big houses, and we don't have as much of the other aspects of the plantations and the daily lives that people lived here.
And I see a lot of windows. What would windows have been like in an enslaved dwelling?
Possibly non-existent, possibly small. So most buildings, and I would say a high percentage, I don't know an exact number, in the 18th century, for example, were very small. So slave quarters are often very similar to those. Some of them, again, would have no windows. They might have openings without any glass. So you can imagine how cold that could be in the wintertime. But the size also depends on how many slaves are living in that building. You know, you may have a family of 4 that lives in a 16 by 20 foot house, but then you might have a barrack style slave quarter that's, you know, has 16 people.
When I study the life of children, because they are dear to me, is just, I see the hope in them, even when so much has been taken. And I wanted to know, what was it like for an enslaved child? And often when we have read books in the past about children who were in slavery, we read it from the point of view of the white children who has a companion, someone that they grow up with. But to try to understand what the enslaved child experiences, you have to look at the context in which that child lives. Even though they have a mother and father, they also have a master.
Lucy Jefferson and Charles Lewis married, and they had a son named Charles, and Matilda is fathered by the son named Charles. She had a long life. She witnessed a lot. She went through a lot. But when she was here, these were the child years.
And so that child is growing up with this sense of, who do I listen to? They know that their parents can be sold at any time for any reason. And they learn that they too can be sold. They see violence. It's a part of that plantation life, because that's how enslavers kept people living in fear.
She was 9 when they left for Kentucky. So she was born in 1799. And, you know, when I say fathered by, it's like we have to think about language and terminology, and how do you talk about these things? I have written about it as sexual exploitation because no matter how you look at it, there was a power dynamic difference um, between enslavers and the women that they exploited, and the women bore children from this. So Matilda was one of those children.
You run through the range of emotions. Yes, there's some anger. But the anger really comes in when you look at the slave schedule, is when you don't see B for black, you see M for mulatto. Because if you see mulatto, something happened to one of your ancestors in the slave master.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't something that my ancestor agreed to allow her ancestor to have sex, to rape her probably. It was not a matter of love. There's a mulatto on that schedule.
Because of that fundamental tension at the heart of Thomas Jefferson, who can write all men are created equal and then perpetuate enslavement for hundreds and hundreds of people, and of course subject people in his own household to sexual violence and have children of his own who were enslaved.
What's the most important thing for us to understand, Sally Hemings, from your point of view?
I think a lot of times we always speak of Sally Hemings only in the context of Thomas Jefferson, and that I think takes a lot away from her and who she was. The fact that Sally Hemings was 14 when she initially went to France, and then when she becomes pregnant with Thomas Jefferson's child, she's 16 years old, and Thomas Jefferson is 30 years older than her. She negotiated with Thomas Jefferson to make sure that her children saw freedom, and that did come to fruition. All 4 of her children that lived that were fathered by Thomas Jefferson, which is Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Essen Hemings, they all did see freedom.
People call me the truth teller because for too long we've been told lies. And when you don't know the truth, you're operating in a place that's not authentic. We need to know about the first people. We need to know about slavery. We need to know about the LGBT community. We need to know the experiences of children, immigrant populations, people of color. And though it isn't comfortable, it's not meant to be comfortable.
So pretending something didn't exist, even something as ugly and as well documented as slavery in the United States, it is a disservice to the people who lived through that, who are legacy of that, who had parents or grandparents or great-grandparents who lived through that. That's denying them personhood. So you have to say, yes, we did that. It was a terrible thing. And how we restore faith and justice in our institutions when we know that we had that history is hard to do, but we have to do it. And you do it through sustaining things like the Voting Rights Act or affirmative action, which are, being torn up because it's, quote, not a problem, or the founders didn't think of it. Well, the founders didn't think of a lot of things. And they were a bunch of white men who were slave owners. So, okay, but here we are, 400 years later, and we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's very clear. I've been more cynical in the past. And Julian Bond, who was a colleague of mine for a long time, one time said, Ed, I don't know. It strikes me that those are useful words. And it sort of changed my thinking about that, So I'm rather they wrote those words and not really believe them than not write them at all, I guess is what I think.
I think it is good to see, I'll say, how he has these ideals, and the people who really bring those ideals to fruition are the enslaved peoples and their descendants, and peoples who did not have those rights. And seeing those ideals that Jefferson did dream of and really are like the mission statement for this country, but seeing the ideals come to life through people who those actually weren't even offered to, but they demanded.
Growing up in the 60s, basically watching the civil rights movement on television, right, and knowing that they were right. I'd never really, just because of the exact age that I was and openness to this, it wasn't really like I had to have a conversion experience, you know, from not caring about this to caring about it. It's like it was saturated in the Life magazines that we get at home and all these kinds of things, and the music that I loved. It was very clear that, you know, racial understanding is the right thing to do. And even though my church certainly didn't emphasize it, I can remember really from Vacation Bible School, Jesus loves all the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. And I got chills now. I can actually feel that even as a child. Well, but that's not what it looks like, you know. So there are like these seeds were planted, you know, that ended up, you know, at the particular moment that I decided that I would become a historian, what matters enough to write about, you know?
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that it's the wrongs that we have yet to address seem to make writing about dead people for a living worthwhile.
I think for a long time, white people in particular have not wanted to see the truth about enslavement, about colonization, about systems of oppression that were put up by our ancestors and are still doing work now. And so when we don't tell the truth about history, we kind of block it, and we don't want to see it, and that does it's still at work. And let me see, try to rephrase that. When we don't tell the truth about history, it does violence to ourselves and the people around us. And when we ignore the ways that history is still alive in our present, we're unable to see the world clearly, and we're not able to effectively address the legacies of that history.
When we talk about the legacies of slavery, it's everywhere, from the womb to the tomb. We think about infant and maternal mortality rates for Blacks. It's 3 times higher than it is for whites. Think about housing, how redlining has kept people in certain areas. Think about education, even burial places, cemeteries, everything. You see the legacies everywhere, and it's so pervasive, we really don't even think about it unless you're involved in social justice work. It's as pervasive as slavery was at one time.
We're at Richmond Hill in Richmond, Virginia. This is a historic monastery that is also a place where people do residencies. So I lived here for 3.5 years, and a lot of social justice work goes on here. And it just so happened that I had met Joby Hill, who's a historic preservation architect, African American. We came and did indeed assess this tool shed to be an enslaved dwelling that dates to the 1840s or 1850s.
What we want to do with that dwelling is to make it a place of healing and reflection, lament, contemplation, and education. And so we want to make sure it's a space where people can go in, have that understanding, that feeling of stepping into the past and coming out ready to do something to create a better present and future.
Archaeologists love ceramics. They last a long time. They contain a lot of information, cultural information. They express preferences and maybe tell us something about the place that we're in. That's kind of the big question. What went on here? What is this place? Why is this place so powerful? Why is this place so special? I think we're going to be learning most about the period of enslavement here, most directly, because some of the artifacts that have come from this already, and it's capped by concrete. But, you know, like I said, there's bone in this surface, there are ceramics in this surface, there are bits of iron, there is charcoal, so things that we can date absolutely with technical, you know, radiocarbon dating. So I think this really is going to be a foundation. We've worked our way from the present back in time, and it's a great way to go, because if you ask people to get into a time machine and come back to this really difficult time period, you lose a lot of people along the way.
I'm trying to avoid what I'm feeling because I'm weepy right now. My heart aches with what I think happened to the people who lived in this area of our campus, because I know just from storytelling what they endured as enslaved African Americans.
My work now is with healing generational trauma, specifically in African American. That is my main focus, African American families and communities. And about 10 years ago, I did some research, and there was hardly anything about generational trauma in the African American community. There was nothing that talked about what kind of trauma the enslaved Africans would have endured and passed down through the generations. So the work I do is to help families and one of the things that has to be done is you have to know your story, your family story and cultural story. You need both as much as you can. And we use a methodology using the genogram, which is a tool from family systems in which you can identify patterns. And we look at patterns both of trauma, but also of the gifts and resilience that come through the families as well. And as we identify and learn about our families and about our culture, we're then able to create rituals of healing for them. For both and celebrating the things that you find and discover that are the good things in the family, because a lot of these stories are but they're buried, and it takes awareness to be able to see them, to be able to recognize them, to be able to ask the question.
I know that my call is healing. My call is healing of divisive systems, divisive spirits, those things that are breaking up families and churches and businesses. Anything that is not rooted in truth is going to divide our people, not just African Americans, but across the board, all ethnicities. You have to stand in truth so that we don't keep hurting one another.
Confession is something that can be grace-filled, and that when we deny the historic sins of the past, if we deny our collective participation in these inheritances and these legacies, then we have these omissions that that allow us to forego and circumvent the grace that could be found in confession, in collective repentance, in the possibility of being aware of what has happened in our past and how it haunts us in the present, and that we can hear the call to participate in a culture of repair.
A core component of my faith is a reminder to be here. So something that I think of a lot is a phrase that I actually have tattooed on my forearm is "Here I am." That's a phrase in the Jewish and Christian testaments. It's also resonant in other faith traditions. I have ancestors who were enslavers, ancestors who were colonizers. My role as a person of faith is to repair the legacies of my ancestors, legacies that still do damage in this current state.
But now you're seeing celebrations of whiteness that seem vanished 20 years ago, and people reinventing this idea that there is, you know, some essential essence to being white or European or whatever.
And right here in Charlottesville with Unite the Right.
Yeah, and just to be clear, they're not from here. They came here. I feel it's important.
It's important because I'm not from here, so help us understand.
Well, you know, I mean, Charlottesville is extraordinarily liberal, which is why they came here. You know, it's sort of in the face because they were talking about removing Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee statues. They use that as an excuse to do all this, but they came to Charlottesville because of the Jeffersonian legacy, the statue and all this, to celebrate that, at the same time to denounce those of us who wanted to remove Confederate iconography. So, but it's weird to have lived here in this pretty little college town, and suddenly to say Charlottesville, it's that event.
History is not the past, it's the stories we tell about it. And everyone has a story. But it's the reality that if we break it down to its bare bones, our history is our story and what we tell. What does whole truth history mean to you?
Okay, pretend with me, if you will. Raise your right hand. I swear to tell the truth,
Truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Where do you know that from?
Every courtroom.
You know, don't like deliberately have missing pieces or, and often if you know more, the legal system expects you to tell the breadth of what you know if you're under oath. And so that's perspective is what we want to bring to the teaching of history. Okay, one last question for you.
The fortune of meeting John Hope Franklin.
Yes.
Who,
the father or the son?
The father.
Yeah.
Who, in conversation with Roger Wilkins at the 2007 Slave Descendants Reunion at Montpelier.
Wow.
And his family were involved in the Tulsa.
They were?
Yeah, they were there.
Wow.
His father experienced it, and he is a young child. Yeah, having him sit in front of everyone and saying, you know, I don't teach African American history. I teach American history. Because if I'm not in it, then it's not American history. And, you know, having those moments of clarity in, you know, these experiences that I've had kind of maybe comes back to your original question of like the why, the how do I do this, the how can you feel compassionate for the homeless in the tent city and you know, have the same interaction with, you know, the mayor of Charlottesville if he walks through the door.
Yeah.
That it's we're all in a certain sense equal, but we all have stories that need to be told and understood. And
when you think about equal, how are you thinking about that? When you say
it's a good question.
I know you are. I was just curious how you think about it.
For me, as a historical society director, it's like everyone in this community, this is their historical society, so I treat everyone equally.
That's good.
And looking at an 80-year-old institution, in a society and a culture that is reflective of the society and culture it comes from. There's also some systemic issues there in terms of, the realization that there were certain things, and there's been a lot of research that even not within the historical society, but with others, through the Jefferson School and UVA, saying, well, why do these inequities exist? And it's like, well, if you look at the legal issues, you look at the covenants, you look at the things that have been in place, it's been segregating, it's been separating, it's been putting people in these places for so many years. To flip a switch, it's not just going to change.
Extremes. Yes. You hear the far left and the far right, and all us poor fools in the middle trying to do the right thing and get along. We're not listening to them because we're labeled. If we say something, we all make mistakes. And the far left might hear something I say, oh, you're this. They're going to label you.
We're trying now with the statutes and all that. And we can do it.
You can't be inclusive and cancel people. The same people who talk inclusion don't want to hear from certain people. UVA doesn't want to hear from certain people. Everybody deserves to be heard. If you're going to be inclusive, include everybody. And talk, but they don't,
Hard.
It's hard.
Very hard.
Yeah. We've got to take what we know and what we are capable of digging into ourselves and finding. And we've got to take that out caringly. And I've got to go find a Make America Great person and get to know them. And find out where's the grief.
Do you want to meet my brother?
Yeah. I'd love to meet your brother. If he likes to hunt, I want to hear about him hunting. And you follow what I'm saying? I want to find something in common.
I don't want to monopolize, but you mentioned George Floyd, and I'll go back even further to Michael Brown. I grew up right outside of Ferguson where he was killed. And I had a friend. She and I had worked together for years and years. Lucia, she was Black. She had a boy and a girl. I had a boy and girl, same ages. So we're raising sons, daughters, working together, going out socially. After Michael Brown, I was reading a book, The New Jim Crow.
Yes.
She came by my house and she saw it sitting there. And that allowed her to open up to me and share with me what she went through as the mother of a Black boy.
Yes.
And the fear. For years, I had no clue. I said, Lucia, I worried about my son breaking curfew. You worried about your son coming home dead.
So conversation can take place, but sometimes it needs a trigger, And unfortunately, it was Michael Brown's death that
if I can just ask, what specifically would you like to see talked about?
I think it's the parents that don't feel comfortable. To be honest with you, it's the parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then in turn, they teach it to their kids. And then they say, oh no, am I supposed to feel that way? Then I'll feel that. But they play with kids of all races. I'm quite sure in school every day they talk somewhat. And you know, I think, you know, everyone should be talking about it in the end.
When we're talking about banning books, that's because, this is my thought only, people don't want you to know. Number one, they want to blame it on the children to say we got to ban it from the children, which really is not fair to the children. It's actually a disservice because they're missing about facts of even a timeline through history, you know, and things like that. But my kids, I made sure, I don't care if they called it a banned book, they needed to know and things like that. But again, I'm one of the few people, and maybe not a few people, that when they start making those lists, I start buying them.
Yes.
Start buying them.
We're seeing so many African Americans in prison today, really because of how laws are changed over time, right? It, the way that the legal system has worked in this country is that it's been designed to disenfranchise people of color, right? And the wording may be changed so that it looks differently on the surface, right? So instead of specifically saying African American, it may say something else that also puts you in that exact same category, right? That you would have been in before.
It's Slavery by Another Name, that book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think man's basic instinct is to say, I was here. And I think that's why we have writings on cave walls. All kinds of depictions on cave walls that man did. I think man is saying, I was here. But for us, as a people of color in this country, we're still trying to be made invisible, to say that you don't exist. That's what happened, I mean, when we were commodities, we were cargo. James Baldwin had a saying when he was interviewed in England, he told some people, he said, your people came over with papers. My people came over as cargo. So we came over as cargo with no papers, no identification, just like a box. So if we don't try to reclaim that identity, we'll never get it. You know? And we have to be intentional. Nobody's going to do it for us. In fact, quite the opposite is going to happen. They're going to continue to try to make us invisible, wipe us out of the school books. So you don't have a history. You know, come on.
The statistics are there. The statistics say that the challenges are higher against authors of color, books about people of color, and books by and about members of the LGBTQ plus community.
And why do you think that people would not want people to be reading those kinds of books?
Because it tells a story that's challenging, right? This nation has a very difficult history with slavery and reconciliation and racism, and we have to talk about it. Like, we can't just say, oh, well, slaves were learning skills, as some educators and politicians in one state in particular like to say. You have to let people know the truth. The truth is scary, it's hard, and it's the truth. So if you, parents, want to shield your child, that's fine. But sometime that child is going to be out there in the world having to get along with and understand all kinds of different people who don't look like them, act like them, come from the same socioeconomic background, have the same understanding, have the same attitudes about who they want to love or who they want to be married to. And you have an obligation, I think, to prepare them. And so if the parents won't, well, there's a public library. Here it is.
Teachers know how to make it come to life. We have the most effective way of teaching history is something that seems to be intrinsic to people, which is a story, right? And in a story, now they read Harry Potter, they can understand that complexity and moral ambiguity and so forth, right? But we act like, oh gosh, we can't talk about it in history, you know? Instead, just to say, here's what happened, and look how people change, and look how people confronted these wrongs or these challenges, and how they grew and developed, or how they made the wrong decision, you know? So history doesn't require science, it requires empathy.
And so when we're only telling the small pieces of what is comfortable for the majority of people who think, oh, then we're putting everyone else down when we tell these other narratives, when we're only telling that sliver, then we're losing so much of the history, in which actually when we tell that history, you're empowering a lot of people. So many of the stories that I think are so beautiful, and it makes the story of America complex. And I think that's what people are scared of, is the complexity.
We had Nicole Hannah-Jones here, and it was interesting because I booked her shortly after I think the book came out. It came out first as a supplement in the New York Times, and then it was later published. And so we were early on her radar. And then there was boatloads of controversy about her that erupted. And so when she came to speak, it wasn't actually about the book, which is normally what happens. Well, you know, this is how I got interested, and this is my story, and this is how I started my research. It was really about the backlash that she has faced. And remarkable woman, like, wow, good for you. But my favorite picture of her is one that we took in the evening during the event, where she's up there and she looks amazing. She's got this bright orange, and she is fierce standing up there. And she basically says, I refuse to stop being who I am and stop saying what I feel needs to be said. And I thought, go, yes. And so for us to bring somebody like that to this community, and yes, the audience was definitely with her. There was no question about that. But it was really important for us to stand up with her and say, yes, in this public library, we support who you are, what you're saying, and we will continue to do so. So am I courting controversy? There would be some who might suggest that, but I call it courting ideas, being on the right side of history, standing up for what I believe in. These are my beliefs, that people have a right to be who they are and to love whom they want and to read whatever, whenever, however. Those are core beliefs that I don't think you get into libraries, I hope not, without having some of those core beliefs about you're here to serve people.
What's your take on books being banned in schools? Yes.
Book banning, like, possibly, in my opinion, I think it sets like a different tone for self-worth and what is acceptable in schools. If topics like Black history are banned, or LGBTQ information is banned in schools, it brings to light that, you know, people's identities, students' identities are not accepted, and something that's worth, you know, kind of keeping away from other people when it's really just about existence often. And I think like the umbrella term of CRT, which is like often weaponized to kind of justify this banning, kind of just adds to like, I don't know, like just like deteriorating like self-worth, I think, for a lot of these students. So
conversation, especially when it comes to like truth and power and uncovering all those elements. And I think just opening up the discussion to a new generation too, about not sugarcoating what happened and saying like, this is it. Like, I'm not gonna say it's something else. I'm not gonna let you be saved from this. I think that is a demonstrated form of agency within us.
I've interviewed young people, and they're very aware of this. They may not know how to articulate what they're missing, but they sense that they're missing something. And they're very clear about expressing that, and they're kind of angry about it. Like, you know, I know that they're not telling us what we need to, you know, really know. That's the sense that that they have. And I asked one young 16-year-old, why is it so important to you to know your family history or to know the history of the country? And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, if I don't know my history, I don't know how to value myself. If I don't know my history, I don't know how to value myself.
Growing up, I would sit at my grandmother's feet, and she would sit in this wingback chair in one room in our house, this white living room. It's like the second living room with all white furniture. Kids were not allowed to be in there.
Did it have plastic over the couch?
Of course. And she would sit in the corner in this chair and read the Bible. And I would sit at her feet and ask her to tell me stories of the olden days. And that's what I called it at the time. So she would talk about walking to the school that's on this road, going to church, meeting my grandfather, all of these things. But she would tell me bits and pieces of the story. As a filmmaker, I'm going back and telling these stories and piecing together, okay, grandma told me a little bit of this, great aunt told me a little bit of this. Now we can go do some research and kind of fill it all in and tell a full story so the family can really understand our history.
You need to know the ground on which you stand before you can take a step. So it's very important to tell all of the history and to reach for it, right? Like I said, you know, grandma sitting in the living room, you haven't asked the question. Ask the question. Ask the question, because that answer is going to change how you look at everything. And then you'll have different questions. And that's what the Black aesthetic is all about. It's about asking the question, and what transformation comes from asking the question. So you have a new question.
I have a stool that my great-grandfather made. And the story around this stool is that he would put it in front of the door when his children came home, that would be my grandmother. And before the kids could come into the house, it was at least 8 of them, they had to stand up on that stool and say one thing that they learned at school that day. Okay. My mother did the same thing with her 6 siblings. When they came home from school, before they even got into the house, they had to stand up on the stool and say one thing they learned that day. I had that stool, and my sons, when they came home, they stood on the stool and said one thing that they learned that day. And I had an occasion to take that stool with me to a classroom. I was a speaker, and I told that story. And it didn't occur to me until that moment that the reason why my great-grandfather made that stool was yes, to teach his children the importance of history and education and knowledge. But a big part of that was, and I get emotional when I think about it, my great-grandparents would not have known how to read, how to count, how to cipher. And it was their way of having their children teach them what they learned in school, because they were the first generation to go. So, yeah, it says a lot about the strength and the stewardship and the push and the perseverance that comes through a lot of families, particularly mine. It definitely keeps me in the ranks of being a teacher in the way that I know how to do it. And I'm hoping that my efforts not only heal going forward, but in my spiritual place, in my ancestral acknowledgement, that is healing the folks that were here before me.
My grandfather was born in 1842. My great grandfather was born in 1842 in Amelia County. John Town's slave schedule shows that in 1860 he owned 66 slaves. On that slave schedule are 2 males 18 years old in 1860, which means they were born in 1842.
Right.
One of those could have been my great-grandfather.
Oh, wow.
That's the story of our history.
Yes.
We don't know because he's listed as male 18.
Right. So describe the significance of the 1860 slave schedule and how it's organized.
Well, that's the way we were identified. up until 1860, unless prior to that, if you were on the slave schedule, you were enslaved. If you were listed as a black person on the regular U.S. federal census, you were a free black man or a free black woman. But the slave schedules enumerated the name of the slave owner and the number of slaves he had. And just John Towns in 1860 had a net worth of $67,000, and most of that was enslaved people. When the Civil War broke out, and after the Emancipation Proclamation, in 1870, he was broke. He lost all of his property.
And what?
And wealth. He lost all of his wealth. So that's the story of us, this nation being built on our backs.
I think the entry point for history, when I'm talking for myself and when I'm talking to young people, is family history. I remember I had a student once and he said, "Miss Smith, can I just tell you that I'm not interested in history? I don't." I said, "I know, I wasn't either when I was your age." I said, "And I know why you're not, because it's not interesting and it's not relevant to your life and it's not, in terms of how it's taught." So, but I said, "But just, do this for me. Just go interview for your project, go interview your grandmother and, figure out what you want to ask her." And he and I worked on, and he came back so excited. He was beaming. And he said, "Miss Smith, look what my grandmother told me. I didn't know this and I didn't know that." So I think we have to make history more personal to people's lives.
At my children's school, there was, during Black History Month, there was all of this art that was being put up all around the school. And some of that art included decorating doors, classroom doors. And one of these doors said, they did not take slaves. They took doctors and lawyers, and it lists and it went on. And a parent, a white parent, came in one morning and said that they didn't like that particular door. And it was taken down. And, parents talked about it. There was, these kind of forums or conversations that happened, but the door never went up. It never went back up. It stayed down. And me, being African American and reading that statement on the door, made perfect sense to me, right? That folks were enslaved once they were brought here. And I never understood what the negative was by saying, we were not slaves. We were not born as slaves, right? There were people had all types of jobs, and they were lawyers, and they were doctors, and they were teachers, and that sort of thing, just like they are today. And other folks, including that particular parent, never got that. So I feel like when it comes to Africa, we need to understand better that our history did not start with enslavement in America.
At my age, I want to just embrace as much of Africa that's in me that I can, and in all aspects of life, spiritually as well as physically. So that drives a lot of what I do now. What I wear, sometimes what I eat, where I go, where I vacation.
I was recently able to go to Ghana as a part of a trip with the city of Charlottesville, actually. And when I got there, and the experience that I had there was just one, so hospitable, and just the culture that was there. It's literally of their culture to be hospitable, but to be able to go back to this home continent of my ancestors centuries later was just crazy to me. And I was able to go to the door of no return, and that being there brought into context it was just a very spiritual, to me, experience. And being able to be like, dang, being able to speak to my ancestors basically and being like, I made it. Like, we made it. We were able to go through the significant, horrible, traumatic experiences throughout the centuries that was pressed upon us. Yeah, I'm able to make it back, and able to step foot in footsteps that they possibly went through when being forced out of their home place. And so I think bringing that story into context for us African American people who are here now, that we made it. Like, we are able to tell our ancestors there are a lot of things still going on and a lot of injustice going on toward us, but we made it, and we are pushing, and we are punching, and we are trying and continue to try.
Guinea-Bissau is my tribe, and a lot of the spirit workers, as they call them, the spiritualists, are women. The healers are women. And I was like, yes, yes. These are really my people. These are really my people. And earlier this year, I was reunited with a lot of those folks that I had met in 2019 from that experience with the NAACP when I went to the State of the Black World Conference and met these beautiful people who were in leadership, trying to not only carve a new path and a new story for Africa as a nation, but including us in that, their lost children. So talking about the 5 regions that we think of Africa as being the 5 regions, now there is a 6th region, and that would include the diaspora, those who are here, the lost children on these shores in America, but also all over Europe and Asia and extended everywhere.
I'm trying to achieve the pictorial aspects of narratives. You know, there are a lot of stories that are about history, but also about possible histories, about things that could happen, and also things that can happen. This piece right here is also definitely about a history that did happen. Was it 2020? But other paintings show allegories and narratives that are narrative of actual historical things, but done in a way to be more provocative as to give light and meaning and understanding to that allegory. This is a painting that was commissioned by Richmond Hill to really give focus and give light to education and literacy during the time of chattel enslavement. The colors are a little downplayed because the imagery, of course, that you would see is all black and white, you know, and so to imagine what colors they use, I picked this kind of a deep purple on purpose, which would probably be a little rare. They'd probably wear black, but I wanted to have some sort of a regal aspect. And they are in a structure because they had to be surreptitious about learning. So this painting is titled A Reading Lesson, but it is definitely kind of a covert operation of the time.
Walls are symbolic in many ways. Walls keep people in and keep people out. And for a long time, the wall here at Richmond Hill has helped create a sacred space, and it has also indicated to a lot of people that they're not welcome. And Richmond Hill has hospitality is at the core of our mission. And it was important to us to transform a symbol of exclusion into a symbol of hospitality and welcome. It was just an amazing collaboration of 5 artists to create this mural. And there are 3 hands that are on the wall. One is a raised fist, a black fist, and that is an ode to the justice movement, specifically around racial justice and liberation for Black people.
Anywhere But Here, that film was it was made to allow African-American men whom were incarcerated here locally to be able to tell their stories from their perspective, specifically to teach K-12 students about what not to do, right? So we went into these interviews with these gentlemen talking about what decisions were made that got them to where they were, even the circumstances that they may have grown up in. And then they talked a lot about things that they would do differently. I did a film called Raised, and if we look back, that film talks about the Vinegar Hill neighborhood, which was right here where we're sitting today, and how through urban renewal that neighborhood was destroyed, and over 600 neighborhoods across the country were destroyed in the same way.
Yes.
But then those African Americans that lived in that neighborhood are now displaced. And how does that affect them and their families generationally?
I teach a class in conjunction with arts and sciences at UVA, specifically designed for first years to kind of integrate them into Charlottesville. And I not only share the history with them, but we use the art that is created here to illustrate how the history is played out theatrically. So I take this class and I say, okay, this is the history of Charlottesville. This is what happened to Vinegar Hill. This is what happened to Gospel Hill. And this is how it impacted these people. And now we are going to talk about August Wilson's Jitney. And we're going to make these connections between real life and theatrical life and talk about it.
This project has exposed me to Black narratives and Black storytelling that I was partially afraid to document or film myself. It's always been a thought of mine, but I've never pursued it actively until this project. So my whole goal is to create narratives that speak to me, speak to issues I care about, and connect me with my Black identity. And if I leave a mark on the world in that regard, then that's fantastic. But I never want my narratives to just be messageless. I always want the audience to walk away with knowledge of something that they didn't have before.
The narrative has always been controlled by folks that are in power or that on the other side of the story, right? There's a lot of guilt in storytelling. There can be, especially when we talk about our history. And that's something that I feel that we need to get past is the guilt. You know, folks that are here today, although they may be white and they may have certain history in their family's past and that sort of thing. But we need to get past that guilt and understand that those things did not occur by the folks that are still that are here today, right? But the folks that are here today are the ones that can make that change. So it's a matter of us kind of coming to the table together to help fix these issues. But we have to get past that guilt first in order for us to be able to have that conversation.
This is grassroots reparation at its finest. And Allison Thomas, who is one of our founders, who lives in California, met at our table Viola Baskerville, who was our former Secretary of Administration for the state of Virginia. And they met, and they were both at the time in their lives when they were doing genealogical searches. They found a common name first, and they didn't stop when they found that name, Braxton. They kept going in their separate searches to find out more about their families, to find 7 generations back, the link where most people stop. Allison already knew that she was a direct descendant of the largest slave owner in Virginia. So there was no surprise when Viola, who was several generations here as a Virginian, was able to find her link going back to those same plantation homes that King Carter owned, And so we know that there was an enslaver and enslaved relationship early on. I don't know if you've heard about the story of Gwen's Island. Yes, and that's very important. Gwen's Island was a location where it used to be the home of Black people. Beautiful, like lakefront property, that kind of thing. And it was a colony, a settlement for those right after the Civil War. And so they were all descendants of slaves, Black people who lived there. And then it was, how can we say, reclaimed by Europeans, by white people. And they were all driven off of that property. And Allison did the research. Not just her, but several others have done the same thing all over the state of Virginia. But Allison particularly has taken the time to find those Black relatives, find those linked descendants, and bring them back to the property that their ancestors were put off of.
So first of all, Carol has been so wonderful, you guys, to me, just helping me and giving us access, to be able to take these pictures. And so I was telling her the first time I met you, we were talking about this book because you had this book too.
Yeah.
How did you get it?
Well, I've had several copies of it.
You have? How is that?
Well, a friend of mine gave me, I think, the first copy, and then another friend ordered the last 3 copies available, I think, and brought them to me.
Wow. And why do you think they gave them to you?
Well, I really don't know, just because I'm probably the only one, that's left.
Yeah. Because they knew it was related to the house, to the. And so, what did you know about the house when you, from your husband? Did you know some of the history that the Lewises were?
I didn't really know that much until I read about it.
What we're trying to do is tell the truth about history, like what happened in the past. Why do you think it's important to talk about history and to tell all the stories?
Well, I think everybody needs to remember history, so it doesn't repeat itself.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Okay. Now just go straight down and make a left at the bottom of the hill.
Make a left.
History, by and large, up until recently, it was white men writing history about white men. There's no, I don't think there's any debate there. You say history is written by the winners. Well, I mean, I think it's important to tell the truth about everything. But I think now there's been a lot of, either not necessarily untruths but just inaccuracies. Or leaving a lot of things out. And I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to the future if we continue to do that. So that's one of those lessons of history that we should learn is to do it better. And I think better means including more of the story and more of the people that made that history. And I think, as an archaeologist, the past doesn't, or the artifacts in the ground, they don't discriminate. People can discriminate, but the artifacts don't. So we can take those artifacts and we choose what stories we tell. But I think the best thing that we can do is get that information and tell the most complete story that we can based on what we have. And that's kind of our philosophy. But that's basically how we understand our duty as an archaeologist is to tell as much of a complete story as we can based on the evidence that we get. And that could lead us in 1,000 different directions. But if we don't do that, then who else is going to tell that story?
That's sort of the reason why I got into history in the first place is trying to just to know the way things really were, And not even, for me, it's not even because, I read George Washington chop down a cherry tree. Did he really chop down a cherry tree? That kind of thing. It's not even that. It's just that wanting to know, and if you do know the truth, I don't want to get too philosophical, but if you do know the truth, then you can figure out where to go next, if that makes sense. Pre-Civil War, it's a very hard to find anything that's original primary source written by an African American, especially if they were an enslaved person. So they're going to have to rely on court records, county records. They're going to have to rely on state records, or if we have them, on the enslaving families' personal papers. We may have a will, we may have a diary, we may have an account book that's listing those kind of things. So there are people, tax records, all that. So those are the kind of sources that they're looking for.
Everything they wanted to know, they left us a piece of paper, thinking they're going to prevent something, you know, coming forward or from that time. Just like, okay, state of Virginia, 1853. All right, slaveholders, all of you, record the births of all your slaves. Thank you. Thank you.
and say more about that.
Well, I think there is a conflict, but it's a benefit. And me as an African American researcher, they didn't realize they were leaving pieces for us, or those of us that are researching this, to fight. Every time a law was changed, you can go back to the 1600s and coming forward. Every time there was a situation, they created a law. Now it's documented, you know, and I'm sitting here thinking, do they not realize what we did? You know, it's to our benefit. And it's almost like, okay, let's keep going. Okay, you want to know how many people I've got? Or how many people I own? I'm going to tax you. You're going to have to pay a record. You know what? I need to plan for if I'm gone and for my family. So I'm going to have to do a will. And I'm going to say everything I got and who gets what. And you know what? I might include names. Another record. I mean, or buying and selling property. We got a record. And I just, it's almost like, did they not think of this? Did they not? Every conversation, and again, I mentioned the slave birth index, 1853 to 1865. Okay, slave owners, record all the births and their mothers' names.
How are you doing? Good to see you again. I'm fine. Good to see you.
So happy to be here. I was trying to get everything in order so I wouldn't embarrass myself. Okay, I'm going to talk for a minute about how it's organized.
All right.
So we have family names,
right,
enslaving families. Okay, these are reports about Richmond Hill related to our African American History Project. These are called Hollinger boxes.
Yeah.
And if you're a researcher, you love when they deliver.
Oh, yeah.
Look how long the stacks are. And this is just one part and one floor. That it's.
So it's
and it goes either direction.
So let me grab, I can grab one. So essentially, you kind of have a before and an after. This is the before. This is the after.
It's all about the power. And so, like, when we remember everything that's happened, we challenge those prior beliefs, and in challenging that, we limit the power that has been upheld through centuries and centuries. Yeah.
Our perspective is just necessarily so limited. We couldn't be in the world if we were so profoundly sensitive to all of these stimulating things, especially when you start thinking about this crazy stuff. Start seeing it everywhere. Just the potential alone to tell authentic stories, to see authentic historic landscapes and understand how they're still affecting us, not just how our ancestors created them or why, but how we've forgotten that they're there, but they haven't forgotten that we're here. And I think that we need to tell these stories to keep that memory alive. If we're not learning from the problems of the past and the approaches that we had to those problems and the outcomes from approaching those problems in that way, we're not doing it right. We're telling fairy tales.
I know when I first started my research, I was so taken and upset by the injustice and by the how could this happen to so many people over such a long period of time? As I've gotten older, so that's been 30 years I've been working on all this. As I've gotten older, I feel like my focus is a lot more on their humanity and their agency and their, you know, how they found ways. The other message that I got when I went by myself to the land was we negotiated life. We negotiated life. So what I take from that is like, you know, if somebody wanted to go down to the river and swimming, they might make up a reason that they had to go do some work, or I don't know, each part of their life, I feel like they found ways to do what they could within the confines that they. The other day when we were on Mount Eagle land, the farm where my ancestors were enslaved in Charlottesville, this magical moment happened where a llama just galloped across the field. And I spent a few minutes and we just looked at each other directly in our eyes for multiple minutes, not seconds. And I was thinking about after that, when I was in the car and thinking about what the message was that I was getting from the llama. And the llama was saying, welcome, welcome back to that land. When we think of westward movement, what do we typically think? And what was happening to people like my enslaved ancestor Matilda, who was taken with the Lewises to Kentucky?
The movement to Kentucky is the first real westward migration of enslaved people in the South. Okay, that's happening even before the American Revolution.
Oh, that was excellent. Don't know. I can say a lot of different things, but I can say right now that that was excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Pam. I know you're still on the road, and so you're calling in. But we also have the film's director, Gloria King, online. Are you still there, Gloria? Thought I had seen you from the.
Yes.
There you are. Ah, there we are.
Okay.
Fantastic. I'm going to spotlight you for a second there while we get Pam connected. But I wanted to thank you for your work and to highlight your efforts and your involvement here by giving you a second, if you don't mind, to explain a little bit about why you got involved with this project and a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I have been doing documentaries. I went to grad school for film, and the first documentary that I did for film school was on my grandfather, who lived to be 108, and excuse me, I'm sorry, lived to be 100, almost 101. I'm thinking of something completely different. And he lived in a rural town in Sherrill, South Carolina, and it gave me the opportunity to interview him. And it was oral history in our family that we were related to some way Thomas Jefferson, whether it was by blood or from that particular plantation. So that was the first interview, or documentary that I did. And looking at my career, that's been my focus, is stories and unearthing stories about Black history through ordinary people, and those traditions of oral history passed down, because often our history is not in books. So that's why this documentary, when Pam called and told me about her ancestor Matilda, was really important to me. And when I think back, I actually had put on my LinkedIn page underneath my name, slaying, I think something like slaying false narratives. So this was very much aligned with the type of work that I want to do, the type of stories that I want to tell. Pam and I met because I have a cousin that lives in Richmond, Virginia, who's a brick mason, and he was working on the building at Richmond Hill. And they started a conversation, and she started asking him questions about how he became a brick mason. He was like, well, my father was, and my grandfather was. And she was like, tell me more about your grandfather. And he was like, well, I have a cousin who knows a lot about him. So that's how we connected. So it's serendipitous in a way.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. It's always those connections that you find, especially when you're looking through your family's history, as many of us in this room and online know, working in genealogy and doing that kind of work. Also wonderful. Yes. And Pam, are you with us as well?
I am.
Fantastic. Well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put both of you on the spotlight there, so that we can take questions from the audience, from folks who are here, folks who are online. If you are online and you would prefer to type your questions, please feel free to do so. We have the chat pulled up, so we'll see them there. If you are in the room and you would like to ask questions of either Pam or Loria, please come up to the podium here so that they will be able to hear you and see you as well. So we'll start off with that. We'll go for about 15 minutes or so if we have.
Great.
Got Robin coming up with a question already.
So, wow. I can think of maybe 15 different venues where I'd love to show this film. And I wonder, and I may have missed it, but can you say anything about the distribution plans that you have? Is the film available for sale? Is it available to libraries and other public spaces to be screened? This is just a beautiful work. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Robin. And I say that on behalf of both Lori and I. We're so glad that you enjoyed it. And we are in that process now of making our distribution plans. And we've been so busy trying to finish the film that that's still a little bit up in the air. I've been asking people who have come to the screenings to just kind of learn where people would like to see this. And I talked to some young people who were at our screening yesterday. Young adults have been an important part of this project. And one of the things they said was, I said, we could put it on we could put it on YouTube. And they said, yeah, Netflix is an important place, but they said Max is really important. It was primarily conceived of as an educational tool for teachers. So we are talking with the Zen Education Project. Some of you may know that if you're in the field of education, Howard Zen, the People's History Project, and also Ed Ayers' New American History, and also the American Library Association through Diane Crush. So we would love to hear your thoughts on what networks you're associated with that we might be able to distribute it to. We'd love to see this in classrooms as well as for public dialogues. Thank you so much for the comment and question.
Fantastic. Viola wants to ask a question as well.
Hi, Pam. Thank you so much for your work. That's just awesome. I mean, people in the room were tearing up, I'm sure, here. I have a question. One of the things you bring out is the difficulty in research and doing African-American research, the emotional side of research, and the pushback against the truth. In our thinking about organizations and entities that need to hear this, how can we partner with those that are most reluctant to hear the truth and maybe give suggestions on how to reach those organizations? I know our own governor here in Virginia, Governor Youngkin, has a problem with the truth. So, and there are governors in other states. I don't want to only push, Virginia, but we need to be thinking, how do we get in those avenues?
Yes. Thank you so much, Viola. And thank you, Viola, for being a part of this project. It's interesting. So there are two levels that I can think of. There's probably many, but interpersonal work. So there's a lot of work going on, for example, through Coming to the Table, where descendants of enslaved and enslavers, and you saw some of that in the film. So people there are associated with people who are beginning to quote unquote wake up and, that sort of thing. So groups like that are doing bridge work, I think are important. But also on the structural level, I do think it's important to try to, one thought I had, because I worked in politics and government for a long time, there are departments at all levels of government that deal with issues of equity and human rights. And I think it would be important to try to reach out to those folks as well. So again, I would love to hear what your thoughts are. We would love to hear what your thoughts are about getting it out there. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else online or in the room who would like to ask a question? Oh, we've got one more. We'll go in the room, so bring them on up. Swing on by.
My name is Michelle.
Michelle.
Yes, Michelle. Okay, I live in a small town called Colonial Beach. The history there and the separation is so present even to this day. So I asked Viola, how can I get this film to show in Colonial Beach, which I know the Recreation Department would be happy to show it, and that way we can have the swearing in and the honest discussion.
I'm so glad you said that. And Lori, I'd love for you to chime in too. What's your name again?
Michelle.
Michelle. Okay. Michelle, it's exactly the kind of use that we would like to see it, to help be, people can watch pieces of it and then have a discussion. So we can definitely make it available for you as we consider the distribution plan. We'll be thinking about community groups and how community groups can use it. Gloria, do you have anything to add on this?
Not really. I think you are taking the lead on the distribution, but I think we can definitely, I believe we can do like a YouTube channel or something and have it password protected. Yeah. There's also Vimeo, which you can password protect, so that as you're in the process of finalizing distribution, then you can let certain people have authorization to view it.
Yes, that's great. Joseph, if there's a way to capture the names of people who would like to use this somehow, and from the group, if we can keep those and be in touch with you we can also provide study questions. And I've started aligning the film with the Illinois, I'm a native Chicagoan, so with the Virginia State Social Studies Standards, so that it has, a foundation in that. Also, if if there are any curriculum folks that you guys know of, education curriculum folks who would be willing to help us, kind of advise on this educational aspect, that would be wonderful to hear about as well. So thank you.
Yeah, we can definitely get you in connection with the folks who've offered or given those ideas about other spaces. That is no problem whatsoever. And I know personally some folks who might be able to help out with the education curriculum side as well. So we will stay in touch.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
that's great.
Comes back to my old days as a museum educator. Just the job right before this one.
Okay, good. And Joseph, speaking of museums, Lauria does films for museums, kind of. Lauria, can you say a little bit about it? So it's just an aspect of this to kind of keep in mind, like how can we push this out in museum and historic site settings as well? Lauria, can you talk about the piece that you prepared and tell them about Black America Is?
Oh, definitely. Black America is a documentary that talks or explores Black identity, the nuances of it. It kind of skirts the edges of what we perceive Black to be, as well as at the same time, the through line or what connects us as Black people. So that has had a couple of screenings at different film festivals. It's won like feature documentary awards. And we had someone do a design for a museum. So they did a virtual design for it. So it walks you through and it's more interactive if it's done that way, where people can watch certain aspects of the documentary and people speaking, and then there's a space where they would go into a booth and record their own experience. So that is something that I worked with the designer on, so that we could have different versions for museums depending on what kind of spaces they had available. So if it were going to show in like a screening room, that's an option. Or if it was going to be a video installation, that's an option.
That's great. That's really good to know.
Right. And that's the same kind of thing that we can do for current as well. And other films that are coming out by, you know, that are important on this subject. You know, Lori is really good at developing those kinds of tools. I know we just have a few minutes. I wanted to ask a couple of questions of you guys to kind of help us think about getting this to final. So is there something that you would, that you think is not really critical to be in the film part, like I said earlier, maybe on a digital platform or something? That's one. And two, just because we might want to shorten it a bit, two is, what do you think of the title, Current, A Descendant's Journey for Truth?
We have one more question in the chat. Do you mind if we get to that really quick, Pam, and then we can answer
No,
this
absolutely.
question?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I just want to acknowledge that Kimberly, you had your hand up, and I wanted to give you the chance to ask your question as well.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to, I guess I was saying about with Gwen's Island, there was a mention of us now coming together and getting back to the island. But in fact, our branch of the Gwen's Island families, we've been going to Gwen's Island since the at least the 90s, and we were when we were researching our family there. And I believe Allison is the niece of Mr. Dixon, who was running the museum, and that was, I guess, who we when we started visiting there for our reunions and doing things there. I think that's how initially my particular branch of the Gwen's Island family started there. So us going to the island isn't as new as I guess it's presented currently, because we've been going there and holding reunions for years. And in terms of, I guess, the way it's presented, it kind of might look like our families are going back to the island and live there, but Gwen's Island is still completely white. There are no Black residents. Us going there is to visit sites, to look for burial ground, to look for additional information. There are still no Black people living on Gwen's Island. Anytime that we're going there, it is literally a visit. It is literally to, you know, there are no, everyone who was Black that lived there is no longer there.
That's really important. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for us to continue to have a better understanding of this. Danita brought it up when we interviewed her, so that's what we have of the story and what we've read. But you know, it would be wonderful to talk with you before we finalize the film to see what aspects we should be calling out more or adding or deleting, just trying to make sure that we're telling that in the right kind of way. Yeah,
right.
So I appreciate that. If you can leave your information with Joseph, that would be great.
Oh, absolutely, because Allison has definitely helped to facilitate information, and especially in recent years, and she has been very forthcoming in giving information on slaveholders. But in terms of the history of like the exodus of the families and us going to the island and getting back to the island, that part would be a little, but yeah, I'll definitely put my information in. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, it can be both and, right? You know, she's helpful in doing good work, and also there's a piece of the story that's missing. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And Kimberly, you can send that information as a private message to me in the chat, and that way I'll get it and it won't be shared elsewhere, but I'll have it on hand.
Thank you.
I'll answer part 2 of your question, Pam, about the title, because I loved the title of the film. I think that current is got 2 things to it, and it's very evocative in the sense that it's both present and the flow of water, and like that moving aspect of it. I thought that the choice of title was perfect for the film. I'm getting a lot of nodding heads in the room here too, to convey that too. But I thought that that was an excellent name for the film, and I really think that it's a good one in many ways.
That's really wonderful for us to hear. And are there any dissenting views in the room or on Zoom?
A lot of shaking heads.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Yeah, when I think of it, I think of like, there's also a current of currents running through our history, currents of inequality, currents of, kind of positive currents of, perseverance and resilience and all the achievements that we've made. And then, the current of the rivers taking enslaved people and people so many different places. And then also current that we're talking about issues happening right now. So I'm glad to hear, I think we're both glad to hear that it resonates with you guys.
Yes.
About the room where all the records were, that was clear to me what was being communicated. Like it was a room full of boxes but what were we supposed to do?
So one note of feedback for clarification, the room where the records were being shown, the room with the boxes, it wasn't necessarily clear at that time where that space was. I think what the records were themselves.
That's good to know. And Lori, I'm sure is thinking about that. It's, I just have a fascination with all things, repositories. So when we were at the library, so that's the Library of Virginia where I donated my research. And I asked them if we could go to the stacks downstairs. So that was the stacks of the Library of Virginia. But it's good to hear your feedback because we should make that clear. Should we leave that in? Did it seem like not really relevant, or should we just make sure it's labeled, or what's the feedback on that?
Yeah, it seems like the general consensus in the room is just to make sure that it's labeled, but to definitely keep it in.
Okay.
And my team did. I mean, we saw this huge room. What was really being shown that she was contributing to the library, or this was weird.
Yeah, so the question there, and follow up with that, is how much of that space that was being shown was also contributing to the research, and how was it connected to the film too?
Oh, and see, I find the questions instructive in and of themselves, because it means that, we need to make things clearer. Yeah, I guess it's kind of a tangential connection in the sense that the records that are donated, I know with I donated my father's papers to the Chicago History Museum years and years ago, but I was interested too, like, how's it going to end up? Like, where is it going to be? And how are people going to access it? Because it's like you're giving over your baby, and you're doing it because you want it to be preserved for future, generations. But, I was just interested. So when he was saying, all the boxes are donated, and then the research ends up being in Hollinger boxes, that you guys all know of the Hollinger boxes. So I don't know how that reads now that you know that. Should we still keep it in? I guess is what my question.
Yeah. Viola's coming on up.
Yes, because it sends a message for genealogists, especially African American genealogists that work so hard on this research. where does it go after we're not here? And if you don't have electronic files, but you do have the research, and even if you have the electronic files, your state archivist needs to have those records in perpetuity for future generations. So yeah, maybe kind of make a point that, you know, you did all of the hard work, all that hard work was done. You don't want it to go to waste, and to encourage the next generation, the junior archivists, the junior genealogists to leave their footprints on the sand of time, so to speak.
Wow, thank you. That was so well said, Viola. So yeah, that's how I feel as well. So okay, so it's an issue of labeling, and I'm sure Loria will figure that out what to do. Yeah.
I want to piggyback off of what Viola said, because I have never seen that room before. And so because I haven't seen it, and what Robin was saying is it gives me context of where our information goes when we donate, and what we can, I mean, it was a huge room with just lots of information. And I was like, oh, I want to go in. It makes me want to go into the room.
Yes, yes, and that's just a small part of it. It's like a lot more. Yeah.
So
yeah,
and also,
and you know, they consider it kind of off limit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, looking at the room, it makes me want to do more research. Yes, because I know that there's like more that I can look into.
Yes, exactly. They do consider the stacks kind of off limits. You know, they did it as a thing for us and with this film. But I think if you contact people there, and Trenton Heiser is the public historian who works with people donating records. He was the one interviewed in the film, or who made a comment. But people like that, if you make a request to them that you want to see it or tour it, you know, I bet they would accommodate it.
And is that where I go into the library and I look for specific things, and they go downstairs and they pull it up and they bring it upstairs? Okay.
Exactly.
I think if that was an explanation in the movie, that'll be great, just to know exactly what it is and how we can tap into it. And the other piece that I had, I love the name Current. And when the boat is in the water, I would love to hear the white noise of water, the sound of it. And I know you haven't finished the film, but just a thought of that. That was just
that's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was all
great.
I had to
Loria, that's all really good. Thank you. Loria, anything you want to say about this?
Everything that everyone is saying is very, very helpful. Especially labeling the room when we go down there, and maybe we can do text as to the importance of it based on what Viola was saying. And the water, hearing the water when we're in the boat, that would be really great too. As when we do our fine edit to add that sound in. So just to give you some, to frame where we are, like we're at the rough edit stage. So what we've done is we've tried to take out sounds to make the soundtrack clearer so that you can hear it well. And so then after that, you would go into more of the fine edit where you're putting in things to enhance the film and enhance the understanding even more, and more music as well. But that is very, very helpful. Thank you.
If I can just say a quick thank you. Yes, I want to say a word about the music, because you guys, these were young VCU students. Adam is a senior. Adam Jones is a senior, African American. Gary Luong just graduated last year, and he's producing. Like, I went to his home studio to record some voiceovers. And so we found them on the Virginia Film Office. You know, I posted something, and a number of students responded, and we ended up working with Adam and Gary. And Adam was selected by the National Endowment for the Arts as one of the 13 up and coming songwriters. He plays cello and a lot of other instruments, and both of them are just amazing. So just really want to give big applause for their work. And their schedules are so busy. It was so hard for them to fit in this project, but they felt passionately about it, and so they wanted to get it in their schedule.
Could I also commend you on the labeling that or the IDs of the people who spoke? I mean, every time Shelley spoke, you put her name and who she was affiliated with. I think that's extremely helpful. And a lot of films that I see will show that the first time the person speaks, and then they don't do it again, and then you don't remember who they are. So I love the way you did it. One time you didn't do it and I was confused. And it was I think it was the person who hosted you at the Library of Virginia. You later did it, but maybe that was an oversight when he first spoke. And he spoke for a moment, but I didn't know who he was. He was in that room with all the boxes, I think. So I just wanted to point that out as maybe something you might have overlooked. But thank you.
Okay, good. No, that's really great. We've definitely got some title work to kind of clean up and make sure that everything is where it should be all the time. Yeah, so Lori has been talking a lot about, I've learned so much about filmmaking. She's a filmmaker, I am not. So I've been learning this whole process. And one last question, the community meeting that we had, the racial dialogue that was at the Albemarle County Historical, at the Jefferson School with the Albemarle County Historical Society. What did you think of that? That was the one when the guy said, I need to find, like he's a priest and he actually is progressive, but he does evoke the Make America Great Again. He said, I need to find a Make America person and try to have a conversation and try to find something in common. That whole meeting, do you think we should keep or take that out or use it in another platform? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm getting some folks inside saying keep it. And I'm also of the opinion, I thought that particular story with the woman who spoke about her friend in Minneapolis, that was very powerful. I thought that was very powerful. Even if the entire thing isn't kept, that part especially, I feel should be kept. It was one of those moments where, as I was watching it, I've been in so many community meetings about that exact thing since 2016, and you get the same the often referred to as like the kind of well-meaning white folks who say, "Oh, we just need to all come together and sit in it," and then you get to that point where you say to someone, "But I can't go to those spaces. I'm not safe in those areas." You say, we need to let everybody say, but I thought that moment balanced with her statement of saying, but I worry about my son breaking curfew and she worries about her son coming home dead. And that was such a good balance to have those in there. And that moment was what really drove it home. Michelle. Okay, yeah. So the one feedback is definitely to keep it in adding more context to that portion of the meeting. With a possible voiceover. Because you had framed it, you could see that it was framed in a sense of this is a continuation of the conversation that was happening between yourself, Pam, and the director for the Historical Society. And so you could kind of still see it was in the same room and everything else like that. But it was a jump to then everyone else in the room being able to speak as well.
Yes. And Loria, do you want to speak to this? Because from the beginning, Loria wanted that clip that you just mentioned, and that was the singular clip that she felt needed to be used and maybe not the other pieces. So Loria, what would you say?
I would say take everything out but that one piece. I've been standing on that for a long time. Okay, so what you guys are echoing is something I've been discussing with Pam for a while, is that we didn't get enough coverage to make it for the audience to be oriented in that space and with the conversations that were going on. And so originally it just only had the woman with who was talking about the book. I thought that was very powerful. That we were talking about book banning and censorship, and here she is with this book that would probably be on the banned list, if not already. And that book opened up a conversation between her and someone she'd been friends with for so long, but never felt her friend never felt comfortable to actually share what she was going through rearing kids. And that to me was very powerful, because I think it happens often in multiple different spaces throughout our lives. Whether it's corporate America, whether it's the friends you have, I think that there is a disconnect with a lot of people who are not Black understanding what we deal with daily.
Certainly.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah. We got one last thing from Maryland, and then we'll close it down.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Marilyn.
I just want to say that I think what was powerful to me was seeing Lindsay share the fact that she was a descendant and wanted to do right going forward, and put her tattoo on, "I am here." And you had the piece about the youth and their thoughts about how things are. I wanted to know, was the film intended to give a direction to why not love self and others, or encouraging that effort? Or I don't know how to really put it in there, but I was just thinking that this storytelling is telling a good story of past, present, thoughts of future. But what are we asking them to do? Or do we intend to ask them to do? Do we want to just focus on the genealogical work of this? But anyway, that's just how I felt from it.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. That's really interesting. The whole discussion of what do people take away from this is a whole thing. Lori, I would love to hear from you about what you want to see people take away, and then I'm happy to say something as well as we close out.
Okay.
If you want me to go first, I can do that, but you go first.
I can go first. So for me as a filmmaker, I think it's very important to provide information for people, whether it's Pam doing her genealogical research, or the emotion she has as she's doing it, or the impact of a lot of historical things that have happened to Blacks in the United States, the impact of that, or the legacy, if you want to put it that way. Just a little bit more background. I started my film career. I went to undergrad and I did photography and writing, and then for grad school I did film. But in between, my first internship was with Spike Lee. And some people might say his work is a little heavy-handed. Other people might say it's open-ended at the end, like it doesn't really give the audience clear direction. But for me as a filmmaker, and kind of coming out of that school of filmmaking, I just want to offer, and I think it's interesting because you get out of a film, and anything in life, I think you get out of it what you come to it with. So each individual is going to have a different perspective. I would not want to ask anyone to do anything in particular. I would want to inspire them to do something. So as a filmmaker, it's always my desire to inspire people by offering them information. So one person may pick up on one aspect and be like, okay, I really think I'm interested in becoming a younger person, becoming a historian, somebody else who's been thinking about their family history. It may inspire them to start looking into their family history. Someone like some of you who've been doing it for a while, it may inspire you to donate your work to a library. So there are various different parts. If someone who is white looking at it, it may inspire them to really take a look at maybe how they feel about certain things, or how they may have certain things in their past, or just simply may inspire them to look into their ancestry. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
And
Film tells a lot. I love it.
All right. And Pam, you wanted to
And
say
from my
something.
perspective, mine is going to be really short. I just wanted to, not that Lori's wasn't, I'm just saying. I don't know. I think of it as kind of a love letter to everybody working on these issues, to keeping all these issues alive, to being dedicated to telling the truth, and supporting people who are out there doing this work. That's why we had the dedication at the end, which Lori kind of joked, and she said, right now this film has 5 endings. We have to figure out, because I keep putting stuff that I want to, but I really want to basically support and recognize all the people in the struggle that keep historical truth telling alive.
Thank you so much. I think with that, we're going to start our closing out, and just remind folks that we'll be meeting again here in March. This will be my last meeting for a little bit. The baby is on the way.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah, 30th. Yeah, so I will not be able to make our March 30th meeting. But Oliver Barkley, our vice president, will be present and be leading us on that one. But I will be sure to supply images to everyone who requests them of the newest addition to the Rogers family as the genealogy expands, right? Yes, so I do look forward to us continuing the work in March. We have a great program already set up for that. We're going to be speaking about, or we're going to have folks from the Library of Virginia coming here to talk about artificial intelligence in genealogy. So please mark your calendars for March 30th for that program. I'll also say, I sent out an email earlier about the couple of events that are happening these last couple of days of Black History Month. Also here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, Tuesday at 6 o'clock, we will be having Dr. Gayla Sims from the Fredericksburg Area Museum presenting on Black women's history in the Fredericksburg area. So at the end of Black History Month, the start of Women's History Month, what better way to celebrate Black women and have Dr. Sims coming out here for a free talk and reception with food. That will be here at 6 o'clock. Reception starts at 6, and the talk itself starts at 7 o'clock. So please mark your calendars for February 27th, Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. And I think that this has been a fantastic way for us to kind of wind down Black History Month, as is very evident here, and as was just said by Pam herself. Black history continues, and the history makers are going to keep on making, the future shapers are going to keep on shaping, and we've got a lot of work to do. So I am very glad that despite any efforts by governments, by organizations, by individuals to try to conceal and obfuscate our history, we know the truth and we can share it more powerfully and more widely than we ever have been able to before. This is not a new phenomenon in American history. W.E.B. Du Bois will tell you right now that he had to go through it in order to get Black Reconstruction on the books. He had to search his own archives. He did work. He went through newspapers. He went through articles in order to create a book that now people today can still look at and show that what we knew about Reconstruction and had been told about Reconstruction was wrong. these kinds of works, these kinds of films, the kind of work that we do as an organization is an echo of that. We continue to catalog, we continue to transcribe, and we continue to shape that history, the future of this history. And so with that, I'm going to close this out and say congratulations, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bring a friend.